Joining us now, our Wednesday NHL Insider from the Rain Dregs Hockey Podcast, and of course TSN. It's our buddy Darren Dreger here with Sekeres and Price. How we doing, Dregs?
We're doing well. How are you guys?
Yes, very well. Enjoying the Stanley Cup playoffs, and of course the offseason and the hot stove heating up here. Let's start on the Vancouver Canucks and JT Miller. Some local reports that he's going to be difficult to re-sign. I think we always knew that. Have you heard anything new on Miller? And we'll go from there because there might be some trade talk regarding him here soon.
Well, no, nothing specific to JT Miller, but I think this is more of an extension of what we discussed last week. And the possibilities that Patrick Allvin, Jim Rutherford, and the Vancouver Canucks may want to explore moving forward, right? You know, it's not just about amending the salary cap for next season. Every single year, you've got to project what your salary cap is going to look like, and it's always better to get ahead of the game. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from. No different than approaching the trade deadline well in advance of the trade deadline. You know, all it takes is one media report, and that plants the seed of speculation. And I feel like that's still where we're at. But I do believe that there's more of an openness from the Canucks standpoint at this stage to listen to all interest in JT Miller and perhaps others. And I don't think that hockey operations in Vancouver, and this is the reality of their situation, is entirely convinced in what direction they're going to go just yet. You know, what if somebody makes them an offer on JT Miller that they have to consider, that it is just too good for them not to accept? And by doing so, you better your future or potentially better your future, but you alleviate some of that salary cap stress. But I don't believe for a second that any of those decisions have been made inside the Vancouver head office yet.
Well, I saw you tweeting about this. Maybe this is a destination. You tell me. The Ottawa Senators and their general manager, Pierre Dorion, say the number 7 pick is in play. They got to get better. They got to get to the postseason. They're looking to accelerate their rebuild.
Yeah. I don't know how they can't put that pick in play. And I responded, I think it was Bruce Garriock who originally tweeted it. And, you know, there was an availability with Pierre Dorion. And, you know, we watched the Ottawa Senators and the growth that they experienced this season, but it also felt a little bit like missed opportunity this year. I think that, you know, they put way too much expectation and stress on their young guys. Like Brady Tkachuk and Drake Batherson. Josh Norris was hurt for an extended period of time. Tim Stützle, you know, those sorts of young bodies that most definitely are a key to the success of the Ottawa Senators' future. But you've got to have experience and veteran balance to help shepherd them to that place where they're willing and able and ready to compete for at least a playoff spot. And, you know, I think that they've recognized that. It wasn't a step back by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, those are all good young players that I've mentioned. There are more that can be included in that conversation. But I think this is realization that this team needs to make a leap forward, not a step forward, a leap forward. And the only way to do that is to add some experience and some pedigree and some quality leadership. So I'm not at all surprised to see that Dorion is actually willing to consider moving that pick.
Yeah, including at the beginning of last year, he said, now's the fun part, right? Now is where the winning starts. We've gone through the difficult part of rebuild, and now the winning starts, and, well, they didn't quite win enough, not close enough to a playoff level.
Dregs, too, I do wonder if a guy like JT Miller, all of a sudden, without even playing a second here, sees his value go up because of what we're seeing in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that is that spectacular offensive talent is winning the day this year in the playoffs, and multiple facets of it. You know, like everybody that won the first round has got multiple facets of offense at a high level. Even you know, a team like the Rangers with 4 guys of 74 points and higher, 2 guys over 80 points, and that's not even including the 50 goal scorer and Chris Kreider. And then a lot of teams go without saying, like adding a JT Miller to a fairly established team just to give them that extra spectacular player. I mean, you might be tempting for a team that's sort of on the cusp.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's hard to pinpoint, you know, which team that might be. I know last week we again talked about the Minnesota Wild. Well, we know that Guerin has a ton of work to do, but every team that didn't win the first round, that felt like they should have won the first round, has to be looking at a piece like JT Miller. Now, I say that, and then there's cap implications. Could Toronto use him? Of course they could. Of course they could. How do they make that work? It seems like a stretch. Same thing applies to the Minnesota Wild with everything that they're facing. But when you've got as high-end productive players as JT is, and some of the other tangibles that he brings along with it, including a bit of bite in his game. He's a responsible and a real aggressive player when he needs to be. That's going to be an attractive commodity to a lot of teams. And the fact that he's on an expiring contract not too far down the path can also be looked at as a positive for a team that feels like they're close. They're right there. Look at Florida. I've mentioned a couple of teams that didn't get out of the first round, but the Florida Panthers have to be reeling after getting swept by the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now we're talking about a team that's in the dynasty conversation here, but that Florida team looked like a shell of what they were in the regular season. So if capital letters, the Canucks decide that they're willing and want to explore the trade interest, I think it's going to come from all corners in JT Miller.
Is this the playoffs that sets the skill, bowling ball in motion down the hill here a little bit? Because, man, there's a lot of it, and we're seeing skill rise to the occasion. We're seeing skill win the day. Yes, sandpaper helps. Absolutely, it helps. But in combination with skill, I can't think of a more skilled playoffs in a long time, any decades, it feels like.
Yeah, and I think part of that is being shepherded in, Blake, by Connor McDavid and the show that is McDavid and the top line of the Edmonton Oilers, with Leon Draisaitl just doing ridiculous things offensively given the state of his health, which we know isn't great, but he's not complaining about it, and his productivity would submit that there's no issue there. And then you've got a Vander Kane who just poured in his fifth multi-goal game of the postseason. So I think that they're the measure of the work. And because we nationally have spent so much time focused on that and how Calgary is going to try and rebound and try and contain, quote unquote, Connor McDavid, which they still weren't able to do. They were better last night, but weren't able to do. I think that does drift series by series. But the one thing that is always measured in the Stanley Cup playoffs is the will to win, the compete level. And for me, the staple for that, the benchmark is a better way to describe it for that, is the Tampa Bay Lightning. And it's not just how Nikita Kucherov, took apart to some degree Toronto, but certainly Florida. And Steven Stamkos is healthy and he's pouring it in. And Andrei Vasilevsky was as good as he was. And Corey Perry continues to get the big goals, and Victor Hedman, and on it goes. For me, it's the ingredients around that core of success. The guys that, and every one of them are willing to step in line of a 100-mile-an-hour slap shot, right? And to pay the price in the corners in front of the net and all the areas that you need to. And that when you've got balance of the skill you're talking about, Blake, with the intestinal fortitude to do what it takes to win at all costs, man, that's a recipe for success, and it's a tough one to overcome.
The Vancouver Canucks coaching staff has changed a fair bit since we last spoke with you. We found out that 3 different coaches would not be back, including Scott Walker, who was the trusted right hand of Bruce Boudreau when he was hired in December. Walker went on a show yesterday and, painted himself as not the biggest believer in analytics. Do you think that correlates with Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford and the way they want to run this team, that, Walker maybe just wasn't a philosophical fit on that bench?
I mean, that could be part of it, Matt, for sure. I mean, there's history with Jim Rutherford and Scotty Walker. I know that there's a high level of mutual respect there. I can't speak with Patrick Allvin because I haven't talked to him about it. Scotty Walker's old school. That's what made him a real effective NHL player and a pretty successful junior level coach as well. But, you don't rebuild hockey operations the way that Jim Rutherford and the Aquilinis have rebuilt it, bringing in Patrick Allvin, bringing in the great women that have made this hockey operations crew a terrific assembled set, and not be willing to continue to forward those ideas, right? It would seem like a pretty big disconnect to me that you have an outside the box thinking hockey operations group, and then you got an old school coach in Bruce Boudreau and an old school staff with Bruce Boudreau. Hey, Bruce Boudreau is a heck of a coach. He's proven that in a short period of time in Vancouver. Does he need people who are willing to push his buttons and get him to think outside? Yes, without question, absolutely. Does he have to rethink, certain aspects of how this team prepares off ice, how this team runs practices, all of those things? Yes, without question. Well, when you've got a good, maybe young, certainly an aggressive, outside the box thinking staff, they're going to help you be able to do that. And I think that that's more about these changes than anything else.
What would be the norm around the league for management making decisions on assistant coaching versus the head coach himself? What would be the norm for, say, the 3 to 5 assistants that are on a team?
It depends on who you're talking about, and it depends on the experience of the coach. This, even though Bruce is relatively new to the organization, this would be what I would call a bit unique because of his resume, because of his experience, right? But no, I mean, you look at Sheldon Keefe and the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think Sheldon had way more input last offseason preparing for this year, and he had some shoes to fill, holes, whatnot, with Hackstall getting the job, obviously, with the Seattle Kraken. So he would have had way more influence in the hiring and the interviewing and all that than he may have when he first stepped onto the Toronto Maple Leafs bench. I think management is getting more involved in that regard because you want your coaches to be pushed out of their comfort zone. Every coach in the National Hockey League has that security blanket, right? Or two. And most of them, I'm trying to think, is it John Anderson who always was, basically with Bruce Boudreau shoulder to shoulder? We see it across the league with some of the veteran coaches. So I would think that management teams are probably taking more of an active approach now on making sure that the staff is picked with, some specifics related to, okay, how are we moving this forward? Or if the manager or the management group feels like there's an area of weakness with the head coach, well, you better then have a strength with some of your assistant coaches or the group that works around the head coach. And that's probably more just having to do with the bigger departments that now exist around hockey operations and coaching in general.
You mentioned John Anderson. Would he be a candidate to join the staff? I know they're looking for a video coach primarily, but they may be adding more than that. Is there any chance that one of Bruce's long times gets brought in just as a security blanket here?
I'd be surprised for everything that I've said. And that's not suggesting that John Anderson isn't a good hockey man, because we know he is. We know otherwise. And his resume speaks for itself, and his history with Bruce speaks for itself. I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised based on the changes that they've already made and what I feel is the direction of this team. And they're moving forward. They're not looking in the rear view mirror. Now, I say that without talking to Bruce Boudreau or knowing, what sort of push he has, if he has any in that sense. But I don't think that management would disrespect Bruce enough to say, all right, no, we're picking all of your coaches. You don't get a say. So that's why I'm hedging a little bit here.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Wonderful stuff, my friend. We'll let you get back at it. It's getting very busy on the NHL offseason front, particularly as more teams drop on out. Look forward to next Wednesday already. Thanks, Dregs.
All right, guys. Have a good week.